Well, for more analysis on China-U.S. bilateral trade and economic relations, we're joined by Jim Nolt, Senior Fellow at the World Policy Institute. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
So as we've seen, both sides have taken steps to keep the dialogue going and avert a trade war. What do you see as the most significant concessions and developments so far?
Well, I think the U.S. concession on the ZTA penalties were particularly important for China. It is a very big company that employs tens of thousands of people, and its supply chain was severely disrupted by the U.S. penalties. So the fact that Trump has worked out a deal to roll those back is very important for that Chinese company and for employment in China. On the other hand, the tariff deal announced today that you've just talked about in your piece is less significant because it's only a modest reduction of tariffs. Previously, China had talked about reducing from 25% to 5%. It only went down to 15%. And also, many American car manufacturers already make cars in China. And so actually, although this will lower prices for cars for Chinese consumers, it won't necessarily help the American companies that manufacture cars.
Now, as we know, though, the auto deal is just one of many steps that China is taking to try and open up its markets. Do you see this as an encouraging sign, though, that this will, in fact, stave off the trade war?
Well, clearly, Mnuchin is encouraged, but I am less so because of what Trump tweeted today. He said that he's not satisfied and that he's still committed to having a very substantial reduction in China's trade surplus with the United States. None of these deals will have much impact on that. And if he really intends to have a dramatic change in the balance of trade, he will more likely take drastic actions far beyond what we've seen so far.
Now, there does seem to be some dissension in the ranks because a few days ago, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said that the U.S. and China agreed to a framework trade deal and that they were putting the trade war on hold. But then, as you mentioned, President Trump on Tuesday said deal and we'll see what happens. So how would you describe the current state of trade relations?
Well, you're right that there's a division within and among the Trump advisors. Certainly Peter Navarro, for example, his chief trade advisor, is much more hawkish on China, more critical of China than Mnuchin is. And I think Trump himself seems to weigh in on the side of maybe a greater or stronger action against China. The main demand that the United States made in its meetings when the team went to China was for a $200 billion decrease in the U.S. trade in the Chinese trade surplus with the United States, which is really way beyond, I think, the capacity of China to do. And therefore, if Trump continues to push this unrealistic balancing, I think it'll be very difficult to come
this way. Do you see this continue, especially since it continues up and continues to its economy?
Well, certainly, China has had a strategic trend to open its economy since the 1990s, and that has been a steady, if maybe too slow, process for the taste of some. And I'm confident that there will be further steps in China to try to open trade if there's not a trade war. However, what Trump is demanding is not modest incremental changes. He wants a dramatic rebalancing of trade, and I think that's beyond the capacity of this kind of step-by-step negotiating approach that, for example, Mnuchin seems to favor.
Right.
It's really beyond what that can accomplish.
With the two biggest economies in the world going through this, what is this uncertainty doing for their trade partners?
Well, it's really causing a lot of concern. In Europe, for example, has some of similar concerns as the United States about some issues with security, transfer of technology, and so forth. Many European firms have similar concerns, but instead of trying to gather all allies together for a common approach to China, Trump is making a kind of unilateral bid to cut his own deal, to make America first, to really emphasize the United States and its trade deficit. That worries Europeans as it does the Chinese, because he also complains about, for example, the Germans' large trade surplus with the United States, and he has taken some tariff actions against Europeans as well. So
right.
The general in Europe.
Now, it's particularly worrisome for these companies that are kind of watching these two countries in this tariff standoff. What do you think they should be doing to try and navigate this, as we don't know how long the uncertainty is going to continue?
Well, of course, they have to hedge their bets, and in some cases, that means they're already starting to make deals with countries that are not facing the potential of tariff action. And so even before tariffs are enacted, there are some companies and buyers who are making decisions to move their purchases to a safer place. If there is a serious trade war between the U.S. and China, there's no doubt that Europe will be, to some extent, a beneficiary as some of American business in China goes to European companies that can produce similar things. We've already heard that some soybean purchases from China transferred from American farmers to those in South America. So some others may take over some of the markets that the U.S. now enjoys in China.
All right, thank you so much to leave it there. Jim Nolt, Senior Fellow of the World Policy Institute.